Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hope from Home, the show where we bring you conversations of hope from our home to yours. Today we begin with a conversation with bioethicist Moira McQueen. She speaks with Noel Ocol about the ethical issues that we have to consider while living through this crisis. Then Emilie Callan speaks with Francesca and James Rodriguez, who chose to go ahead with their wedding despite the physical distancing and large group gathering restrictions. At the end of the program, Deacon Pedro speaks with Mark Matthews, who shares some technology and digital trends he's been noticing during this time of physical distancing. And of course, they'll all tell us where they're finding hope from our home to yours.
Hello, Dr. Moira McQueen. Thank you so much for joining us from Toronto.
Well, I'm delighted. Thank you, Noel, for inviting me.
Listen, as the Executive Director for the Canadian Catholic Bioethics Institute, I'd love to chat with you really quickly about some of the ethical issues that this pandemic could possibly present to us here in Canada. You may recall that there was some fear, a few weeks back that medical staff would have to play God in a sense that they'd have to choose who lives and who dies by essentially choosing who gets use of a respirator. Now, thankfully, that hasn't been the case, but maybe you can explain for us some of the ethical issues that Canada will have to grapple with in the near future.
Yeah, that's a good point, and so far it's really good to be able to say that some of the things we envisaged haven't happened. So far that's a blessing, but we still don't know. We really don't. We were very concerned about the whole question of who would receive treatment, and so from our institute we did send out a reminder about Catholic teaching that says that everything depends on the condition of the person, that it isn't always necessary to treat, depending again on the condition of the person. We were very concerned about some guidelines that we had seen from Italy, where it talked about age as a factor, but we know that age on its own is not the only factor, shouldn't be the only factor. You can have very healthy 80-year-olds and very unhealthy 30-year-olds. So everything would have depended on the underlying condition of the person. And more importantly, Noel, the doctor's recommendations about whether treatment would be successful or not, because that's usually what we use in any situation and even in a pandemic. So the surge hasn't happened. So I think those sorts of decisions haven't really had to be made here. In Italy and other countries, I think they've had a really tough time working that out. It's a terrible situation, sometimes pretty desperate. So that would be the worst case scenario I think we had thought of. We also are very concerned, as everybody is, about long-term care homes. And the figures have been shocking and very saddening as well to see the death toll in our long-term care homes, and very often again elderly people who are already vulnerable simply by being elderly, and in those homes you're usually in a long-term care home if there's something already wrong. We have been talking at CCBI for a long time about the care of the elderly, not just palliative care, which was very, very important still, of course, but that underlying care for the elderly. And Dr. Bridget Campion, one of my colleagues, has written a few articles about that, the need for monitoring long-term care homes for the conditions to be improved. We've all become very much more aware of that in the past few weeks, sadly, again, because of what's happened. But I hope it serves as a wake-up call for Canadians in general. I think it will, because now we're so much more aware of what's going on, the need for more monitoring, obviously the need for more money. And incidentally, Noel, I think it's very important that we look again at compensation for the healthcare workers in long-term care homes. They are not paid that well compared with other services in our healthcare. They do amazing work, and I think, again, it's been noted over the years that they're not really recompensed to the same extent that they should be, and this, in turn, with this going on, might draw some attention to that. It's a social concern, it's an ethical concern as well.
Mm-hmm. Those are all very good points. Do you mind if I just change the line of questioning a little bit?
No.
I'm always interested in hearing your perspectives. What ways do you think that the Catholic Church will be changed by this pandemic?
Oh, I think it's been interesting to see what's been happening.
Uh-huh.
And I know at many levels, we're all finding it very strange. We're all finding it very strange. And I think it's very difficult for the priests, it must be, preaching to an empty church, but talking to us at the same time. The benefits of technology have really shown themselves because it's been amazing how many masses and services we've all been able to watch and participate in to a large extent. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's wonderful. I think probably most of us will never take our church for granted again. I think most of us, if we did before, and I don't know that we did, but churches for most of us, for practicing Catholics, is very much part of who we are. It's part of our normal weekday or
It was always
weekend
so easy in the
routine.
past. It was always so
Exactly.
easy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you just go, you counted on it. It was there. It was the rock. And now the whole question of not having the sacraments is another aspect that's really been different. The act of spiritual communion, it brought some other points to mind for me, for divorced and remarried Catholics, that's the situation that many of them are facing all of the time. And perhaps that will make our approach to that particular situation change a little bit now that the rest of us, so-called regular attending Catholics, now know what it's like to not be able to receive communion as often as we would like. And again, I think perhaps, speaking for myself, I think it's true. I probably did take it for granted because it's just so part of who we are. But now I think that will really change. So perhaps we'll have a kind of revolution or sort of renaissance of
Yes.
attendance, etc., in terms of being a lot more grateful for our church and the sacraments and
Yeah,
our
I know.
priests.
I'm guilty of that too, to be honest with you. I've always took for granted, hey, if I miss the 9 o'clock, I can go to 12 o'clock. If I miss 12 o'clock, I can go to the 5 o'clock, no problem. But
Sure.
now
Yeah.
well, let
Right.
me ask you this question. Are there any inspiring stories of hope that you're hearing out there that you could possibly share with us?
I think there's quite a few, and I think for myself, with being at home, as so many people are, they
Yes.
have been perhaps more local stories. But I do know from members of my family too, members of my family who are doing things like shopping for older people and telephoning people more often, making contact more often, making cookies and leaving them on the doorstep. These are small things, but very significant for people who are either elderly or alone and who don't have much family to visit. I think in one of our neighbourhoods, people have been going out at a certain time and banging pots, etc., in
Yes.
appreciation of our healthcare workers. And so it's a symbol, I think, of how appreciative we've become of our healthcare workers as well. As with our priests. That we take them for granted very often too, and that now we see them when they're really needing help. And I think there's been a lot of money donated. I know in a sense that's secondary, but on the other hand, it's very, very important for different charities right now to be helped, because I think perhaps a tendency, if we're staying at home, is not to continue those practices, and it's always good when other people remind us, no, we have to keep on giving, support our churches, support our charities. There have been so many things like that. Some of the people I know who are on the front line, I just find them personally inspiring because, and one of them is one of my own daughters who's a nurse. And I think just for all of them in that field, they're getting up, going to work, being very careful when they come home, trying to distance themselves a little bit from her son, in this case, her husband, just because they're so aware of protecting them and still doing out to work and not complaining about it, but just seeing it as something that she and millions of other people have to do, and they do it.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. McQueen, for taking the time to talking to us today and sharing your thoughts. It's always a pleasure talking to you and hearing your perspectives on these topics.
Thank you, Noel. You always have interesting topics to talk about, and this one really is a serious issue. Sure. Thank you.
Thanks again. Keep safe.
Thank you, Noel. You too.
Bye-bye.
Francesca and James, thank you so much for taking the time to speaking to me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Emily.
Now, COVID-19 hit us and churches were being closed. People were being asked to stay home. You were planning a wedding. What was going through your heads when this was happening?
Well, we were preparing to get married on March 21st. And I'm a teacher, so I was on spring break the week before, and James had taken the time off. And it was the Monday before our wedding where things started to really be restricted, and we started to realize that it would not be the wedding that we had originally planned. We had to limit our ceremony to 50 people or less, and we had to cancel our reception. And so throughout the week leading up to our wedding, there were multiple things that happened each day that kind of just began to strip away what we had originally organized for that day.
Mm-hmm. What about you, James? what were you feeling?
Until the Sunday before the wedding, the rules in BC were 250 people max. But once Ontario put the 50-person max limit on gatherings, I had a feeling BC was going to follow suit soon. And enough on Monday, that's when they said it would be 50 people. So we knew the reception had to be, I knew the reception had to be canceled right away. Mm-hmm. And we were actually together on Monday when the announcement was made. So we had to make a few big decisions on the Monday.
Yeah.
And and then, so we also knew that we had to limit the number of people in the church to 50. And so, we had to start making calls and telling everyone who we had invited to the ceremony and the reception that there was no reception, or please do not come to the ceremony because it's only going to be family.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you end up making that decision of actually moving ahead with the wedding? Because some couples have been postponing, until a later date when they can have kind of the big wedding that they originally planned.
We knew all along we wanted to get married. I was talking to her actually after the wedding, and there was not a single instance during the week where we thought we had to postpone it. And it was tough though, because first of all, we didn't have the reception we wanted to celebrate with family and friends. Then during the week, we realized that her brother and my sister couldn't actually make it to the ceremony. So there was something or the other that was coming up in the way, but we both prayed individually and together. And I think on the Thursday, we talked about it, and I felt that God was still telling us, you know what, move ahead, go ahead with your wedding, because everything else is not important. It's just you, me, and her that are important. And so I had no doubts that I still wanted to get married. It looked very different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, there was I think, peace in our hearts about going forward. And it wasn't until Thursday where I looked at my family and said, do you think maybe this is a sign from God that we should wait? Not to say we shouldn't get married, but maybe we should wait. And they said, what do you feel? And I said, no, I feel that we should still get married. And I talked to James later, and he had thought the same in that day, kind of, is this, really think about what God is telling us as we're praying. And I think all along there was a confidence from the Holy Spirit that we were going to go forward and that God was going to show us the way, and he did.
So I want to hear about the wedding day, even if you weren't able to have the reception. Can you tell me about the wedding day?
So we knew a few things in advance. James's groomsmen asked if we would want to have our first dance in the parking lot. And privately, his friends had contacted me and asked me if I was okay if they set up some flowers and some decorations in the parking lot, and that a few of them would just kind of be celebrating from a distance. And I said, that's a wonderful surprise for him. Let's do it. And so when we finished the ceremony, we only had about 30 people in the church. We were to take family photos, and before we were about to go back in to take the photos, the groomsmen said, nope, time to go outside right now. And so we opened the doors of the church and walked out. And I would say 50 to 60 of our original guests were in their own cars, honking and cheering and whistling and taking pictures and videos. And I expected a small group, but it was, the parking lot was full.
Amazing. Amazing. Now, what does the future look like for you as newlyweds now? You're starting your married life at a time when the world is in crisis. So I'm sure that also looks very different than what you imagined it would look like first married.
Yeah, I'm just glad I get to spend all this extra time with her, to be honest. She's a teacher, so she's going to be teaching kindergarten online, which I'm actually excited to look at.
It's definitely a special time. I can't imagine not being married at this moment, to have to pause the wedding and to have to live through this very odd time alone. I think that's a real gift that God has given us each other, and that we were able to go forward so that we can navigate through whatever this is together and support our families the best that we can.
What would you say to couples who are maybe facing this situation right now, or will be a few weeks or maybe a couple months from now?
I would say that even though it is extremely disappointing and at moments very devastating after all of the planning and money, organization, and even dreams and hopes of what the day would be like, it will get better. And God is good and He's faithful. And if you allow Him to use your wedding to change your heart and to change maybe the way that other people are looking at this very difficult time and situation, He will use it for good. And if you're able to get someone to marry you still, my encouragement would be to go forward and to celebrate the sacrament and to really focus on what God has created this for, which is to be together, to love each other, and to use your marriage to bless the world.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Something similar to that. Basically, throughout this past couple of weeks, I've been getting messages from couples. Actually, I know a few who one has postponed, and one is still planning to get married in April, end of April. And I just told them that it's important. There's one thing important: it's her, your wife, you, and God. Like that's it. We didn't have the reception we wanted. We were disappointed, obviously, but I personally feel that our wedding day was so much more special than I would ever have anticipated, ever have planned. I think God used this COVID-19 to, like she said, change how we looked at marriage, because as much as we want to think of marriage as it was just God, her, and me, all the small planning for the reception and everything takes over. And in that planning, we tend to forget what the marriage is actually all about. And God brought that back to us in a pretty decisive manner.
I guess so.
So like she said, I would say go ahead, pray and see what God wants for you. But if God is calling you to be ready and be willing to give up all this, the side things that are not actually essential to the marriage.
Thank you to you both, and for the hope that you bring us. I definitely see the joy as well in your faces and in the words that you're speaking. So thanks for sharing that with us today, and I wish you all the best in your marriage.
Oh, you're welcome, Emilie. Thank you for having us.
It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Mark Matthews, is so good to have you joining us in the program. I think our viewers and might not know that once a month you're a contributor to our radio program, to the Salt and Light Hour, with a segment called What's Good in Hollywood. You tell us sort of some good things that are happening in Hollywood, but you're also a bit of a technological geek. Can I call you that?
Yes,
so,
I would gladly accept that title. So
and
I
every
kind of
once in a
straddle the
while,
boundary between Hollywood and technology.
and technology, yeah. So every once in a while you give us, something interesting about technology, digital, and that's what you want to share with us today. Some digital or technological trends that you're seeing in this time of pandemic.
Yes, yeah. So so last time we talked about the historical effects of pandemic. And this time you might actually say this is the first time we've had a digital pandemic, because the last one was the Spanish flu of 1918. And then only 1 in 10 homes had a telephone, and they weren't even using radio for voice then, just for telegraphy. So there's a lot you could say about, what's happening with technology during this pandemic, but there's a few topics that I want to kind of focus in on. Mm-hmm. The first of those is fake news. So the director of the WHO said disinformation is just as dangerous as COVID-19 itself. And, we're very familiar with fake news from the 2016 American election. And I think this time we're doing better around, So WhatsApp has, they've imposed forwarding restrictions so that people can't forward things too many times. Facebook and Twitter are verifying official, NHS accounts in the UK. And perhaps most importantly, the big tech giants like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, they've issued a joint statement and sort of basically formed a joint task force saying that they're working together to elevate official guidance and suppress hoaxes. And so I think in the near term, this is a good thing. But as a society, I don't know if that's something that we want corporations doing, in the long term. So we need to have a discussion about the trade-offs between kind of our own freedom of speech versus, fake news. So
yeah, I think I'm happy with the people not forwarding so many WhatsApp.
That's true. Yes, we'd actually all be a lot happier with less forwarded, emails and messages. So
yeah, exactly. The old, chain mail that I'm getting so many more now. It's like, really?
Yeah. It's like, no, I don't need your, quack cure for, COVID-19.
Or prayers. Like, I know they're well-intentioned and we want to nourish and support each other spiritually, but really, I don't need 50 prayers being forwarded every day.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I would agree. So one of the other maybe trends that's interesting looking at is isolation and maybe anti-isolation. And so, up until this point, you'd see headlines like, oh, Facebook is increasing depression rates, and, sort of the teenager was always glued to their cell phone. But now, everyone's doing everything virtually. I've received 100 invitations for virtual performances, stand-up comedy courses, discussion groups. And so things like Zoom, Skype, and even Google Hangouts, which we're using today, are enabling this. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really curious. I'm curious what's going to happen afterwards. Are people going to find out just how much we really needed each other and we're going to ditch all these digital technologies and just spend real time together? Or are people going to say, wow, these technologies were great. I don't even need to go, to my mass or my worship service anymore. I'm just going to do it all virtually. So that's something that I think is going to be an interesting change to watch for.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, online sacraments. And, probably, I think, at least around here, every church has been streaming their online sacraments and services.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a question of like, well, how do we properly participate? Like, do I stand and sit if I'm watching this on my mobile device,
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I tried this on my big screen projection, on the wall and with a friend, and, we knelt and sat, and it actually wasn't as bad as what I thought. Um,
Yeah,
So-
we actually spoke about that with Billy in our Salt Night Hour Church for Dummies segment about what was the appropriate way to watch Mass on TV. And then, yeah, there is.
it's a developing thing. Hopefully this is temporary and we won't really ever need to answer that question.
No.
But yeah, and I mean, I think certainly not so much for Catholics because, we're very big on the incarnation, but I think, perhaps Protestant services, this might become a more popular thing. But I'm very much a big fan of in-body interaction whenever possible. And so hopefully, we'll spend more time with each other, in person. But for people like me, I'm a technologist myself, I think it's also a call to say, hey, we should try to make our technologies as sort of in-body-like as possible. And so, there's, VR isn't hot anymore, but, tech companies have not given up on VR, and they're actively trying to find ways to sort of encounter each other through VR. So again, that's a really interesting area that I'm going to be watching for. So
That's very interesting. And just to end, because I do think that you can be present to a certain point through the technology, but you're not really, like, right now you're there, your voice is present to me, I can see you, I can hear you, but you're not really present.
what? Are you saying I'm not real?
No, you are. Well, you're real, but you're not here. I mean, I can't reach
know,
out and give you
I
a
know.
big hug, which is what I want to do. Anyway,
it's very different. And I think sometimes we mistakenly think we're fully there, but we're lacking a lot.
yeah, we are. Which is why I think the church there's some wisdom there to say that the sacraments have to be in person. You have to be present for those sacraments.
We're not going to be hearing virtual confessions anytime soon.
No, we're not. We're not. Probably ever.
Yeah.
Thank you. These are good points, things to look for, things to be careful with, but also something to come back to. I do hope that we're going to take all the good things that we're learning about technology and get rid of all the things that we don't need. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Hope you have a continued blessed Easter season.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm going to try to put clothes on more often, the rest of this time in isolation.
As good as your home office. There you go.
And that's all for today. It's always good to hear from Moira McQueen. I bet she mentioned things that you weren't thinking about. And it's true, we're all having to adapt, and that includes the church. And I guess it also includes people who are planning on getting married. I was so inspired by James and Francesca, who chose to go ahead with their marriage. And what did you think about what Mark Matthews was telling Deacon Pedro? What technology trends have you been noticing? Have you been using technology during this time? Has it been different? Has it been frustrating? Or has it been a blessing? Go online and share your stories with us by following Salt and Light Media on all of our social media platforms and commenting with the hashtag #HopeFromHome. If you missed any part of the episode and you'd like to watch it again, visit our website saltandlighttv.org/HopeFromHome. We hope that these stories inspire you to stay positive and remind you that we're all still connected through hope.